Hey guys, EST here, and I don't know if you heard about it, but for the last couple of weeks, the sun has been going kind of crazy. Just to give you like a quick bullet point breakdown of what's going on, besides, just the last couple of weeks, which has just been non-stop eruptions, M-class flares, which I'll explain, scientists have been using historic data and all clever techniques to try to track the last 24 or so solar cycles. They're approximately 11 years long each. They've been generally increasing in power since 1790, and although I think it was the last cycle looked like it was going to be much, much weaker than normal, we have pretty strong evidence between just 2020 and 2022 that this cycle we're in, cycle number 24, is going to be the absolute craziest. Actually, that's not even guesswork. I think they predicted that it would be lower than normal, but it turned out so far it's been absolutely nuts. And now, in the last couple weeks, it's been extremely absolutely nuts. So that certainly merits some more looking into, so that's what we're going to do. So what does that mean for us? Well, if we get a coronal mass ejection, or CME, it can cause disruptions in satellites, power grids. If it was really bad, it might even start taking out stuff on the ground pretty badly. But luckily, the Earth has this wonderful thing called a magnetic field. So you get these highly charged particles, and they're traveling at a pretty good fraction of the speed of light from what I heard. And if they hit the atmosphere, hit the ground, they start doing crazy stuff. But because they're ionized, I think that makes them polarized. Okay, my particle physics knowledge is above average, but not great. So the Earth's magnetic poles just kind of deflected around the Earth. And that's because we have a rotating iron core. There we go. Now we're all caught up to, at least middle school level education. So it's not just, there might be a CME. Ooh, look at the sunspots. Ooh, look at where we are in the approximately 11-year solar cycle. The last couple weeks have been like, holy cow, the sun has just been erupting nonstop with just CMEs going off everywhere. And there's actually one on the backside of the sun. That actually happened on Sunday, February 15th, just before midnight. That was like full-blown solar flare, let's go, but it's obviously not pointed at us, quite the opposite. But I am not kidding when I say I didn't immediately remember this. The sun rotates. Hey, some of you probably didn't know that either, okay? Like, I can't imagine why it wouldn't. I know how it forms. I'm like, of course it would rotate. It just never, I know we go around the sun. Anyway, if it swings around our way and points it at us, that's going to be a problem. It'll cause something called a geomagnetic storm, pretty much named, obviously, with what I just said at the beginning of the video. So while everybody keeps saying, CME equals geomagnetic storm, which equals all kinds of disruptions in communication, yeah, but we don't rely on satellites like we used to. I know the military does because, boats, radios that use radio waves, airplanes, but right now it's pretty much all underground fiber because that can carry so much more. It's cheaper. There's new fiber lines going down all the time because they're very lucrative. And we keep getting better and better fiber technology, so even Australia has decent internet now, kind of, sort of. And quite a lot of them are below the ocean, but they're made out of plastic and they use pulses of light, not electricity over copper, so they actually can't be affected by any kind of weird atmospheric electromagnetic issues. So that's kind of nice. So this whole, your whole country might drop the internet, probably not. There's like 3+ ways to get to anything routing-wise, these days. And they just automatically route around it. We got some powerful chips, doing the traffic balancing, that kind of stuff. So I don't see communications being the big thing. So people like to use that as a scare thing, but come on, it's 2022. I guess if you got like Starlink, which, yeah, right, it's not even fully launched yet. Or if you have satellite television, which very few people still have. Thanks, AT&T merger that completely ruined DirecTV or whatever they bought. Yeah, whatever you want to blame someone, blame Netflix. But yeah, so the whole communications thing, not a big deal. And if it is, it's something non-critical. I would not worry about that. What I would worry about is maybe like the instruments on a plane. I've heard all kinds of reports from, they're completely unaffected to, it might ground some flights. But let's just jump straight to the Carrington event, which was the worst, most intense, crazy geomagnetic storm from one or more CMEs. And that occurred in September 1859. So that caused immense damage to the telegram network because that was just like copper here to there, send electric pulses, and there you go. So when you sent a little too high of a pulse down it because of electromagnetism, well, it just started lighting stuff on fire and blowing it up. So people have speculated, okay, back then they weren't the best grounded things in the world. I mean, they knew about like lightning strikes and stuff, but they didn't really have to worry about power surges, and they didn't really fully understand like space weather and EM from solar particles and how it might have like a practical effect on telegram wires. So they didn't really prepare for it. They didn't have like the best, transformers, capacitors, all this, power conditioning and stuff that we do now. But they also didn't have little tiny circuits in like cars and computers and stuff that run on like, 5 milliwatts. But the general consensus from all the research I did is that even if we had a Carrington event level thing, it probably wouldn't like fry your laptop. Now you look at the damage that they did during a couple of the nuclear tests. I think one of them, it was 800 miles off the coast of Hawaii, and still an EMP blew out like all kinds of streetlights and stuff. And I think that one may not have even been air bursted. So we've all heard air bursted nuke or like new synthetic devices that have been, people said they're impossible. Then all of a sudden 2022 rolls around and people are like, yeah, other countries might have them. Basically EMP bombs. So that would just be like, that is directed. It's measured. They can calculate it. They know exactly what like the voltages and stuff are going to be. They can aim it. An EMP would be bad. That's when you got to worry about like my laptop failed, my car failed, that my everything failed. Unless it's in a Faraday cage, but crazy space weather. I better put everything I own in a Faraday cage right now. No, is basically what I'm hearing. While the sun is bigger than any nuke, every nuke ever combined, I mean, you could detonate every nuke at once. It wouldn't even come close to the amount of energy the sun puts out. Still, blasting us with the CME, we've got such a good magnetic field on this planet that it's just not going to be equivalent to an air-bursted nuke over an entire continent. Now, I could get into the physics behind it, but just generally, the longer the run of cable, the more it's going to be affected by this. But the longer the run of cable, the more protections they have. And that's where it gets interesting. This is where we get into the maybes and the speculation, and one person saying definitely yes and one person saying definitely no. Would a really, really bad like Carrington event or worse, CME, causing a geomagnetic storm by striking the Earth, would that take out like sections of the power grid? Now here in America, the power grid is awful, and in other countries it's generally worse, at least second world on down. It's a free-for-all, it's not well engineered, it's not well regulated. Like if there was something to affect India, just for fun, just go to like Google Images and type in like Indian electrical grid or Indian electric mess. That would probably be a good keyword to see it. Yeah. Doesn't look very organized and planned and federally mandated on where it goes and how to do it. So if it's just all over, you get all these weird, like there's no load balancers and all this stuff. And do remember, everything everywhere is getting better every year. I mean, I've been hearing about how bad our grid and other grids are for decades. The general consensus, and this could just be, hey, everybody don't panic, is that the U.S. electrical grid could not survive an EMP, like a really big, especially a cloud-bursted, or air-bursted, I should say, nuke. But then we'd have nuclear material in the atmosphere and that would affect the whole globe. So most people don't do that. But a synthetic EMP device, that may or may not exist. I don't know how you're going to get nuclear mushroom cloud level energy out of that. It would probably just be over a city is what they're saying. But if that existed, if they rolled it up in a truck and hit it, well, then sucks for that city. But the whole country would be fine. And, well, the military would be kind of pissed. Now, Japan, South Korea, you start getting into really small areas. That's where the people talking about this stuff always start to tell a little different story, because there's a lot of centralized, hub locations there. But that's a true, full-blown, all-at-once pulse EMP. That's what the P stands for. It is built to do one thing, it does it on purpose. Now, this is just, how much seems to be coming through the atmosphere? What level of energy does it have? That kind of stuff. I mean, how much energy does it have? People were seeing the northern light auroras at night in Mexico. There were a couple particles hitting the atmosphere. So to illustrate like what the difference with the Carrington event was the telegraph, I think I said telegram, telegraph systems all over Europe and North America failed. There were sparks coming off of poles. There were telegraph operators getting shocked by their obviously not grounded equipment. But wait a minute. Isn't Europe and North America on pretty much opposite sides of the globe? Yeah, it was so ongoing and persistent, it wasn't a 1 millisecond pulse from a big, energy device. But as I mentioned before, they weren't real big into grounding back then. So have we had anything since? Because, 150 years seems like a pretty long time. Well, there was 1921, 1960, and 1989. The one in 1921 was actually pretty comparable, but you hear about it less because as far as I could find, there's not much data on it because they didn't even really name it. It did a heck of a lot less damage, and that was almost 70 years later. 1960, there was a pretty big one, and just basically radio stuff was disrupted. And yeah, radio was pretty weak. So then we get March 1989, aka when a lot of people had computers. Now this is still before I think Windows 3.1, a couple years before that, and Windows 95 for sure. So home computers, computers for important stuff. I doubt even like aviation places had like tons of computers. But it wasn't, you got a one giant room computer at a university like the 70s. This is where it gets kind of weird because it was kind of like directed a little bit. So mostly Quebec, Canada was affected by it, and they did get power knocked out. But the rest of North America, besides, some little disruptions here and there, didn't have anything too serious happen from what I saw. But then, July 2012, there was a Carrington-class solar superstorm. I remember hearing about this. We're talking CMEs, we're talking solar flares, we're talking solar EMPs. Apparently that's a thing. It just barely missed Earth. And so, 11 months later, they decided, hey, we should probably get together and figure out what would happen if this would have hit us. So by June 2013, a joint venture of researchers at Lloyd's of London and Atmospheric and Environmental Research, AER, in the United States, used data from the Carrington event, and probably those other three, to estimate the cost of a similar event in the present, because they didn't have, narrowed down levels of energy. Like, what would it take to spark this? What would it take to do this? What would it take to have this reported effect on this length of wire? Like, we had those numbers. They didn't have very good graphing logging equipment and all kinds of diagnostics, but we can figure these things out just to see about how big and powerful it was. And this is where it gets bad. So just to the United States, it would be $0.6 to $2.6 trillion. Now, the total amount of all taxes taken in by the government in a year is upwards of 10 trillion, I think a little bit below it. I don't know, there's a Democrat in office. But just to ballpark it, because when we're in the trillions, what does that even mean? Companies are considered pretty big when they're worth above $1 billion, and a trillion is 1,000 billion. So, hard to get the scale, but GDP, the gross domestic product, it's the value of everything that a country makes in a year. I think it's production only, whether it's sold or not, so just all production of all goods. Yeah, those numbers are 3.6 to about 15.5% of that. So you'd have to take upwards of 1/3, 1/4 of all tax money and just put it towards the amount of damage. Now, I don't think the government would be like, oh, you broke this, let's fix it. It would be state issues. It would be insurance to an extent, though they don't have limitless money. Yeah, we'd have some infrastructure projects, and we'd probably jack prices, or tax prices through the roof. Because when this stuff is damaged, you just got to pretty much throw it out. Oh, it blew this. Well, we got to build another one. Might be able to recycle some of the metals, but boy, is the metal recycling system right now just worldwide a mess. In America and most of Europe, we can barely take steel and make it into steel that we can use. They ship it over, have it processed, and then ship it back, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But you can mostly thank the EPA for that. Oh, it's kind of dirty. It might harm the environment. Better put millions of tons of it on a ship, take it over to China where they'll process it even worse, and then bring it back. That'll be friendly for the earth. Yeah, it's all pretty crooked. So if you just go to oh, we normally order this many transformers and this much copper wire in a year, but we need 10 times as much. Oh, what do you mean there's not 10 times more boats, more workers, more shipping, more airplanes? Yeah, it would be bad. And I think other countries would look after each other first. And that you've probably heard about the whole thing with America doesn't have their own ability to make certain really important power grid stuff. I've heard that's less of a thing in the last couple years. They've partially corrected, allegedly. So Carrington event would be really bad. Economically devastating, disruption of the work devastating. Would it just immediately end society? No. But would there be massive shortages because of it? Yes. It wouldn't be like an EMP where every truck, every computer, every phone is gone. You really probably can't even go to your work and do a job unless you're, even a farmer. God, I was going to say, yeah, the plants don't run on electricity, but your tractor does. And it's all proprietary lockdown John Deere crap. So hopefully the farmers win that lawsuit. Yeah, it would be society ending if it was an EMP. If it was a Carrington event, it would just be extremely bad. A very bad couple of years. It would almost knock a first world country down to a second world country. Temporarily. And there would have to be all kinds of measures. I think there would be unrest and shortages and, additional deaths, anytime you got infrastructure go down and heating and cooling go nuts and people can't work, and then there's poverty, starvation, and supply chain issues and shortages, and that leads to illness, which leads to plagues because people are just generally unhealthier. And yeah, it would be a nightmare. And usually when society's that bad, people who are planning to have kids will delay it. So then you get this huge population dip that you have to worry about, 10 to 20 years later. Yeah, the effects would be ongoing. It would be bad, but it wouldn't be horrible. But it would be bad. So am I saying, oh, wow, let's connect these things. Next week, society's going to almost collapse? Not necessarily. If I were to generalize how bad it would be if we had, what, $1 to $2 trillion worth of damage from a giant Carrington level event, and that the people in 2013 were correct in their assessment that it would be that much damage to that much equipment, and that we haven't really done anything to prepare for it in the last 9 years, which we have. Assuming all those things and that was the damage total, they're saying that society would turn into something between like a really bad Great Depression where like everybody's out of work, starving, the economics suck, you got to grow your own food and just, but still, some people are doing all right, some businesses are still okay, and things are really rough, but people do what they got to do and just kind of settle into the new normal. So somewhere between that and like the Black Plague killing 1/3 of people in Europe, where everything just stopped. You couldn't ship stuff. You had to like lock people out of your cities, and like entire cities would just lose half their population in a month. We're even talking in urban environments, like 70, 80, 90% death rates. I mean, just your city's just like gone. And they survived that. Now, people back then were a lot more skilled and a lot more things were written down in hard books instead of computers, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm not concerned with the continuation of society. I'm concerned with the continuation of me. If I'm dead, forget humans. I don't even like humans anyway. We could get hit by a gamma ray burst and somebody would be in some mountain cave somewhere and society would probably, or mankind would probably survive it. But I'm looking out for me, okay? That's my scale. That's who I'm currently in charge of. But still, the Great Depression through, oh my gosh, almost society-ending plague. Holy crap, look at these death rates. The economy's in shambles, and we almost have like a dead zone in history because people just didn't bother to write stuff down and everything was destroyed. Anywhere on that scale, I'm not thrilled with it. I mean, it would make like the housing issues between, what was that, like 2008 and 2012, arguably? It would make that look like nothing just because of the electrical grid disruptions and the everything that got damaged and that kind of stuff. So it would be bad. But if you're financially, strategically, and like resource-wise very prepared, you're skilled, you're good to go, you would do so much better than the average person that you would probably do fine. The really skilled, talented people were the ones that did well during the Great Depression. And the real smart, tactical, careful, like driven people who are like, no exceptions, we're going to get through it this way and we're going to move ahead, were the ones who survived the Black Plague. So even if it did happen, it would be the type of thing where like, yeah, we could probably come back in 10 years pretty easily. But globally, it would be incredibly rough. Now, still, I say that's the conclusion they came to, and they are professionals, they were like international, multiple people. But who knows, maybe they got it wrong. Like I said, 1989, all it did was fry part of Quebec, and I could say what the rest of Canada thinks about them. Anyway, it was a lot more localized than anybody thought, and people were like, this is at least almost on par with the Carrington event, so somewhere between, oh, look, it fried some things in Quebec, to, oh crap, society's gonna suck for several years. Like somewhere in that area is probably the level of damage we're looking at from really anything the sun can do. I would be less worried about like the damage in the economics and more worried about like what really bad people in control of governments would take the opportunity to do with the scenario. And if you're like, they would never do that, holy crap, what planet do you live on? And let me just cite my source on that, COVID. When it comes to evil people, dictators, and anybody on the left, because that's always who it is, never let a good tragedy go to waste, whether it be a shooting or a natural disaster. Politicize it and use it to pass your crazy totalitarian crap. So let's get back to specifically what's going on with the sun right now, because how bad is it going to get? Like I said, we've had M-class flares, which are the second most powerful, but the last flare that happened on February 15th is an X-class flare. That's the most powerful one. That they don't classify them any higher than X-class. And yet every article I'm looking at says, oh, it would just cause, little tiny disruptions, some communication, whatever. That's a sun expert or anything, but it sounds like it would be worse than they say if it flips around and starts blasting it our way. But of course, solar flares are notoriously unpredictable. I will say, though, they saw something on the far side of the moon very similar on September 2017. So maybe even though it's an X-class flare, it's not like, the Carrington event, oh my gosh, we're just getting blasted. But the sun has been just erupting, like almost for a month straight. I don't know if that's precedented or not. Remember, we haven't had advanced monitoring technology and satellites and stuff and space-based monitoring of the sun for very long. So that's why the couple articles I'm looking at right now aren't terrifically conclusive, because they don't know, because we don't know. You can only speculate. And they'll get called alarmist if they're like, this could be really bad, and then nothing happens. But could we just all of a sudden get blasted by something with like minutes to no time warning? Let me put it this way. Somebody put together just info from Space Weather Live, and they said the sun has erupted every single day for the month of February, with some days featuring multiple flares. That includes 3 of the second most powerful flare category, M-class flares, like one on February 12th, one on February 14th, and one on February 15th. There were also 5 M-class flares in January, and then they're talking about the X-class one that just happened. So is it all just nothing, or is it all something? I wouldn't cancel your travel plans and go live in a bunker, but remember the Starlink launch where they lost 40 out of 47 or whatever satellites? Yeah, that was the geomagnetic storm. They really picked a bad time to launch. I don't know why they thought the storm was over, because it wasn't. It's fairly serious, and it cost Elon Musk a whole bunch of money. Now, from a typical M-class flare, it'll take days for the particles to come bombard the planet. So if we can see it visually happening, we have quite a bit of warning. So if we saw an eruption that's aimed directly at us, we would hear about it. They would be talking about it on the news like crazy. There's so many amateur people watching the sun and looking at, sunreportlive.com or whatever, that if they're like, oh, let's not tell the people it's covered up so that they don't panic, well, 50 other volunteers would just blow the whistle and it would get out anyway. So if it were to be aimed at us, and if it was they're an M1.5 class flare, and it's definitely for certain coming at us, we would have days notice. So you would hear about it and we would have days notice. Now, things do seem to be calming down a little bit, because there was a little bit more M-class events compared to the level of milder C-class events in February. So are we kind of calming down, and are we reaching the end of one of these 11-year cycles? Well, that's where it gets really interesting. So the first article I'm reading says, oh, don't worry, this is perfectly normal for our sun as it ramps up its activity towards and during the solar maximum, the most dynamic time during its activity cycle. I thought, oh, okay, so what are we already through it? What is it, next month? 2025. It's 2022, and it's an 11-year cycle. What do they mean ramps up activity towards its solar maximum? I literally just Googled, when is the next solar maximum? It could be as late as 2026. So we're absolutely nowhere near it, and the sun's activity is going to ramp up and get crazier. Yeah, I think we'll see some events and some disruptions and some issues in the next couple of years. Although, this is the funny thing, they've been saying that I think what we're doing, 22, 24, whatever solar cycle, I mean, it's just since they started counting anyway, not since the beginning of time. But whatever one we're in, it's been very mild with about 60% less sunspots than normal. It's been a pretty mild cycle. So if it's just ramping up with this crazy non-stop, 2, 3, 4 week eruption with solar flares everywhere, almost all M-class, what would make them think this is going to calm down? You know what I mean? So what this article said made no sense. So I looked this up on a lot of external sources, which is always smart. And then I found that one of the contradictory sources was the same darn website, who said we're currently in, solar cycle 24. Hey, I was close. And as of about 2017, they thought the solar minimum was going to be in 2019 to 2020. So if early 2022 is it ramping up towards the solar maximum, and they're pretty sure the solar minimum already happened in April 2020, this is going to be a rough couple next years. 3 specifically. But this whole solar cycle thing is not an exact science, okay? It's not like you can set your watch by it. We haven't been watching it that long. We haven't been watching it with very good equipment. So it's a lot of guesswork being passed off as fact, which is exactly how I would describe almost all of science, actually. The history of the last 200 years of science has been scientists constantly finding out that they're wrong, that their whole entire career has been a lie, and then they can't handle it and usually start lying and covering for it to still get grant money. So, pretty sad state of affairs, unfortunately, but whenever money gets involved, the truth goes out the window. That's true about science, politics, anything. So, maybe we're in for a 30-year cycle. Well, that's never happened. But it turns out that the planets kind of line up every 11.07 years on average, which, that sounds like a suspiciously familiar number. So really, the solar cycle should be about 11 years on the dot. And I think we just had that alignment. Didn't that just happen or whatever? So the subtle little gravity of distant bodies that are 1/1000th the size of the sun is apparently enough to cause this. And when I say causes, what really happens, what is the solar cycle? The poles flip. So it's not just it kind of went up and kind of went down, we think we see a pattern. No, it's now north is south, south is north on the sun, not on Earth, obviously. If the poles flipped on Earth, we'd be in deep trouble. And there's this kind of conspiracy theory-esque thing about how, we're overdue for a pole reversal. Oh, that's what really killed the dinosaurs. Okay, sure. Anyone stating they have evidence that any kind of pole reversal is going to happen on this planet, anytime in the near future is pretty off their rocker. That's pretty much my summary of it. So solar minimums, solar maximums, does it affect temperature on Earth? The general consensus between multiple scientists who independently studied it is no. Does it slightly change our atmosphere, the size of it, and that kind of stuff? Yes, which can cause density changes that make satellite launches kind of difficult. I heard that it was the solar particles, the actual like CME particles hitting us, ejected from the sun, that caused drag, not air density, which we can easily measure. So that caused the Starlink satellites to go down. But if you're really near a solar maximum, you better, put some more juice on that rocket, to get it up into orbit if you're launching a satellite or two. So while it seems like those two things were related, we're closer to a minimum than a maximum, obviously. And then we just lost some satellites due to, drag, basically. But it was a different type of drag. It wasn't air density drag, from what I've heard. When it comes to real heady, sciencey stuff, I wouldn't put it past the media to get it wrong, though, unfortunately. So maybe it was just air density. But boy, would that be clueless. They really should have seen that coming. And also, don't launch during a solar storm. So more or less radiation during airplane travel during a minimum versus a maximum? No. Astronauts doing spacewalks? Yes. So you get up that high, that's where it starts to cause issues. Because really the stratosphere is the only thing that gets hit by the slightly higher, lower UV and stuff. And there's negligible actual Earth surface effects from maximum versus minimum. I mean, if our sun brightened and dimmed by 5%, we'd all be dead. So although it's crazy, we got pole flipping, we got all CMEs and stuff, it really doesn't get to us. And the difference between a complete and utter maximum versus a complete and utter minimum is extremely negligible unless you're already in space. And then the last thing I've heard about, solar minimums versus maximums, they cause volcanoes and earthquakes and all that. There have been some very slight suggestive patterns, but it's 3 cycles worth or something. So it's just people are like, look at this eruption from 1815. Look at this thing that happened. But then look at all the other ones that didn't. So it's maybe it's up 5-10%. That's within variance. It just comes down to we don't have enough data to make a conclusion. So if you're drawing a conclusion just because it's pointing one direction when we know darn well we don't have enough data, that's kind of ignorant. So will 2025 be, sunburns and don't go outside, don't get on an airplane, don't move to Denver, don't launch yourself to the International Space Station? That's pretty much the extent of how much you should be concerned. And no, there won't just be massive just earthquakes and everything everywhere. Unless there might be, just by random chance. But it wouldn't be related to the sun. Because the extent of those changes don't really get to us on the ground or anything in the core or anything like that. As far as we have data for right now. But what I'm talking about, instead of just, solar minimum maximum, is full-blown, crap, we got hit by a coronal mass ejection because of this crazy storm going on right now. And then how many more storms and how much, ongoing eruptions will we see before the maximum in 2025? That's what I'm a little concerned about. And also, the sun seems to be ramping up a little bit until this last cycle, is my understanding of it, since about 1790. That was a thing called the Dalton minimum, which was at a period of unbelievably low sun activity. Sunspots, everything calmed down. But like I said, this cycle, number 24, just the last couple years, has been incredibly low in activity. Like I said, sunspots are down 60-70%. As of 2020, I couldn't find a newer number. But ignoring cycle 24, all the ones before that were unusually strong. So could it be ramping up? Well, that seems to be the trend, but then scientists have absolutely no idea why cycle 24 was so mellow. Probably something to do with random chance and planetary movement and slight chemical changes and core density and stuff in the sun. Although, stars tend to go for a billion years or something? So I don't think 20, 30, 40 years we're going to be there's a lot less hydrogen, a lot more heavy metals. No. A 0.0000001% change in molecular makeup of the sun is not enough to do anything. So really it comes down to we don't know why what is happening is what's happening. But if you look at an ongoing trend since the early 1800s, okay, it does seem to be going up. And we did have this thing called the Dalton minimum. I think at this point I should probably clear something up. We're in solar cycle 25 right now, but they haven't been 100% sure about that until fairly recently. Solar cycle 24, which was unusually mild, started in 2008 and ended fairly recently. Around 2019-ish, it's not like a calendar, there's no exact date. So since 1790, we've been seeing every cycle get a little bit more activity than the one before it, generally in an uphill curve, but then 24 looked really calm, but then 25 already, now that we're, a year and a fraction into it, looks like it's going to be the craziest high-powered one we've ever seen. And we're approximately over 3 years away from the maximum. Yeah, that's why I'm making this video. If it ain't on your radar, it's about to be. Like I said, that's what has me the most worried, but on a scale of like 1 to 10, it's about a 2. War with Ukraine is like a little higher. Biden being in the presidency is a little higher. Nancy Pelosi still somehow being alive, even though she's like 1,000 years old. That's at least a 3. And that brings me back to, the prioritization. Like a while back, I stumbled across a website that's like, the pole shift, it's coming sometime in the next 50,000 years, but definitely the next decade. The Earth's poles are going to flip and everybody's going to die and you need to be underground and you need to prepare for just that. Don't prepare for anything else. War? No. Famine? No. Plagues? Oh, those never happen. We never have global outbreaks and pandemics. No, the only thing you should be prepared for and the only thing you should worry about is a magnetic pole reversal. Because I read a bunch of stupid conspiracy websites that are trying to sell me something and I'm an idiot. That is like a direct paraphrasing of what that website basically said, in my opinion. They had a darn good library of scanned in public domain ebooks, though. So, shout out to them. You may have heard this saying before, but nobody says it anymore, and I'll tell you why. If you're prepared for a zombie apocalypse, you're prepared for everything else that's lesser. Who was prepared for, giant pandemic with a low kill rate, but governments all universally go crazy, and then most of the damage is economic, plus lots of death of, vulnerable people and older people. But even with that global threat to society, you still have to go to work. Okay, who had that on their end of the world bingo card? People sitting around in 2020 like, oh crap, I was ready for the zombie apocalypse. As, war breaks out, we're fine. Shortages, we're fine. Epidemic. Yeah, I thought it was going to be more Ebola meets Black Plague. Nobody saw this kind of thing coming. It's so left field. Well, then I could start talking about, like, what if a comet passed too close to Earth, it started melting because of certain things, and then it rained water on us, and then it upped the level of the water in the oceans really rapidly because of that, plus screwing with all the clouds and the jet stream. Bet you never heard of that one for apocalyptic scenarios. Okay, so if you're prepared for the zombie apocalypse, what are you going to do about that? Shoot at the comet? I mean, food, water, safety, okay, great. But see, that brings me back to, well, if you're prepared for what you need on a daily basis, personal security, safety, water, and food, well, then you're prepared for everything. Then you're prepared for, a CME big outage that destroys, 5% of the world's electronics or whatever. Which, yeah, the Carrington event, it sounds like that would be about right. But the thing is, we don't know. It's speculation. I mean, we know the power level, and we know the power level that most electronics on the ground can take, so it's not that far off. Our scientific knowledge is way ahead of what it was like 50 to 100 years ago. So do I think sometime in the next, 300 years, we're going to have a Carrington event? Yeah, mathematically, yes. I can't imagine why it wouldn't. And plus, since the Dalton minimum, the sun activity's been going up for the last just over 200 years. About 232. Yes, probability and data would be pointing that direction. So do I think it's a direct and immediate threat? Yes. Do I think that other things on Earth are a bigger threat? Yes. So I'm not just going to be like, ooh, I just heard about this and I'm going to think about it nonstop, change all my preps, change all my safety stuff to put everything in Faraday's and have backup electronics, and then something else blindsides you like, airborne Ebola or like a bird flu or something. Just prepare for everything. And a lot of people are like, I got guns, I got water filters, I got food, I got seeds, I'm all set. And then they didn't have any PPE. They didn't have masks. They didn't have hand sanitizer. They didn't have bleach, and they scrambled. They're like, oh my God, I got completely caught with this. And then thank God that the death rate and all that turned out to be not quite as bad as it could have been. Still pretty bad, but, So instead of preparing for just one thing, you should prepare for everything and then look back historically and look at the real actual threats. A lot of people are like, oh, we're definitely going to get hit by a meteorite. Well, that happens every 50 million years. No, we're not. I would bet that we're not. People are like, oh, a gamma ray burst, I'm going to have a bunker. You know that those travel at the speed of light, right? So if you are on the surface, you're getting hit. I mean, it's gamma radiation. Unless you're a mile below the surface, you're getting hit, okay? So you're going to go live in a mountain because sometime in the next 10 million years, you might get hit by a gamma ray burst. GRBs aren't even on my radar, okay? Because I don't care, because it's not realistic. Just because I watched it on the Discovery Channel doesn't mean it's real. And even they kind of, if they're responsible, so in other words, the Discovery Channel, not the History Channel, they'll say the odds of getting hit by one are so low. If you're going to worry about something, you should worry about volcanoes, earthquakes, and real crap that actually happens every couple decades. And wars. and plagues. I mean, like literally every couple decades, like within, we'll say 100-year human life, because, you know, if you're alive now and you're fairly young, you probably live to be 100. How many wars, how many plagues, how many, like, everything have we seen? And everybody's like, oh, but we're like halfway to, like, you know, Star Trek level. We're so much higher tech. They used to use lead pipes for water back then. Those dumb cavemen in the 1920s. We're not that different. Our technology isn't that advanced. We don't even have limitless clean energy from like fusion or some other ZPM crap, even though that's totally debunked. We can't even really leave this planet. Yeah, we're not that far ahead, okay? And plus, when was your grandpa born? Not that far removed from those morons back in the 1900s, you know what I mean? People thinking, oh, wars, conflicts over resources, those don't happen anymore. We don't just invade places because we think we could, okay? It ain't like the 14th century. Oh, my kingdom is stronger, so let's go take them over. Yay, war. That doesn't tend to happen, and if it did, I think a lot of other countries would be like, okay, can we not? But look at every conflict from like 1950 onward. It was either resources or it was religion. That's it. I think that's like upwards of 95 to 99% of major armed conflicts and like open gunfire war was because of those two things. Now, how are things in 2022 involving those two? Yeah, I don't think we're a whole lot safer and less, you know, prone to society collapse than we were 100 years ago, but like 1,000 years ago, yeah, I would say, yeah. Yeah, we collectively as humans have our stuff together a little bit better than back then. But then again, 1850, oh no, some telegraph poles blew up. Oh well, I'll have to move on with my life. Now look at what we need on a daily basis to just do our jobs. How did you farm in 1860? How do you farm now? What kind of technology is involved? How do you communicate? Was it horses carrying paper letters? Or, you know, if anything, we're more vulnerable now. So I don't have to explain to you that things are dangerous even though you feel like your life is safer because it's the modern era, when it probably isn't. You're probably less safe. But if you needed an explanation and background, if you're like, hey, I just like to be prepared in case stuff happens, because sometimes there's a blizzard, sometimes there's a tornado, sometimes there's a war, sometimes there's an outbreak. First of all, COVID just happened. I mean, come on, like, you don't need to convince people that much, but boy, the amount of gun sales that went up because of government actions in COVID, holy crap. The amount of people just scrambling to get toilet paper and water filters and stuff, and the amount of views on preparedness related content on YouTube, it like doubled or tripled. Yeah, I don't think you need to tell society why you're consider yourself perhaps a prepper if you're watching this type of content. But if you did meet the absolute most ignorant people who are like, nothing's ever going to happen, I think that's a better explanation. Like how much more sensitive everything is, how much less skilled and resilient people are, higher populations, crazier governments, faster reacting everything, and the rise of the power of an individual and what they can do. Like what could one person do in like 1810? Something with dynamite? What can one person do now? Build a nuke and detonate it? Not quite, but like, I mean, the power of one person on the internet, a hacker, the power of one person driving a truck into like a high voltage line that could take out an entire city. Things are more sensitive. They are less safe. And that's why I'm a little bit concerned about this whole solar activity thing based on what's been happening just in February. So just be aware. I mean, like I said, it's enough to at least cause me a little bit of concern. But, you know, if you don't just sit there and live your life, because, yeah, anything can happen at any point. Somebody could come up behind you and shoot you in the head tomorrow, okay? Live your life. Be prepared. Prepare for the, you'd think I'd know it at this point. Prepare for the worst. Hope for the best. And don't live your life in fear. And if you want something a little more solid than that to make you, help you sleep at night, well, one, don't go look up an animation of the recording of the February 15th X-Class flare. Holy crap, I'm looking at that right now. My God. And two, you know the old saying from Dungeons & Dragons, I don't have to outrun the dragon, I just have to outrun the dwarf. And, the other sayings that people are 10 meals away from an absolute riot collapse of society, and that has been proven in other countries where, like, a thing broke out, there's no more, shipments of food coming in. Yeah, 10 meals is about what it takes. And how long can people go without food and water? So you only have to be ahead of them. That's why everybody says any serious event would be accompanied by a mass die-off. It just is what it is. You might think, oh, well, society, they're tough, and there's resources, and there's governments, and there's this and that. We got MREs, we got, look, if a really, really, really bad event happened, like we're talking, Carrington would be close, but that or worse. I think we could recover from that and kind of, handle it. But in certain locations, people would go 10 meals. But let's say something just horrific happened, like an EMP or like a nuclear war or something. Besides the initial die-off, there would be a giant die-off. It's just that. Just people. There's too darn many people in the cities especially for something like that to end well. So that's why rule number one is if something happens, get out of the cities. And rule number two is you only have to do better than those people, than the average unprepared person, which is 99% of society. Assuming the event itself doesn't get you and you survive it, You just have to have more food resources and self-defense to just ride it out until the big die-off. I know it's an unpleasant term, but it's realistic. Ask any expert what would happen if there's just no food on the shelves and everything just stops flowing. I mean, maybe the water still works. Give it a month and people would starve. I mean, in the summer, give it, a couple days, people die of heat stroke. That's just with no electricity. I think during the that one outage that happened in when was it? '08, was it? The Ohio one? Kind of New York, the blackout. 130 people died from that, and that's in America, and it wasn't that hot. Okay, this ain't exactly a desert. So if some big thing happens and some nuke drops or something, whatever, and you die from it in the first wave, oh well, then you lose, game over. Otherwise, you just got to do better than everybody else, and we're talking by a margin of like a couple days to a month. And that's a bit grim, but like I said, it's realistic, and if that doesn't reassure you, well then, I don't know, grow up. You're not quite to the level of emotional toughness you need to be, just saying. Everybody's different, but hey, I'm just saying. And what a great reason to have your friends and family and anybody you care about subscribe to my channel. Okay, I'm not going to go that far, but check out some preparedness stuff. Go to a firearms class with you. Learn how to package stuff in Mylar bags, which the number one best documentary on the entire internet might just happen to be on my channel. Learn some skills. Take a class. Go to a volunteer thing. Because every move in the right direction is you being the one to come out ahead if something bad happens instead of being caught totally unprepared. So on that happy note, thanks for watching. I'll let you know if anything else crazy happens with the sun, although you probably won't have to hear it from me. And I'll see you guys next time.